Bienvenidos and welcome to all you exotic animals out there. My name is Crossbite and today we're going to be looking at how to make different kinds of animal ears in VRoid Studio. We're going to focus primarily on two different kinds, rounded and pointed ears, and I think that kind of encompasses the majority of animals out there. So first one we're going to start with is going to be the rounded ears. And this one's pretty simple. We're going to go ahead and create a new freehand group. And we're going to pull the mesh out a little bit far left and right, and we're going to pull it in really tight front to back. And we're doing that because we want to have the ears kind of centralized on the top of the head, of course. So I'm going to pull that in. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my materials. So I'm working with something fresh and new if I want to change the colors or manipulate that in any way later on. I'm going to make it a little wide, a little thick. I'm not going to mess with the curves or anything like that, and I'm just going to draw a little loop from the inside of the head toward the outside and back around. And that's the basis of our ear, but we want to have some kind of interior color, usually a lighter color, so I'm just going to grab this white that I've got. You could obviously use whatever color you'd like, and I'm just going to make the same kind of thing, just a smaller little loop. But that's not quite good enough, so I'm going to crank up the thickness. And that's looking better. So with the default textures, without messing with anything on my model, this is fine. If you want to get in there and make some better textures for your ears, obviously feel free to do that. I'm going to go ahead and crank up the smoothness on all of these too. The hairs are a little jaggy by default, so we're going to just crank up the smoothness, make these round ears look even more round, more smooth. I think that's way better. So if you want to get in depth with this, like I said, make those textures a little more detailed. But that's going to do it for you. That'll get you started. Obviously you can make them bigger, smaller, whatever suits your needs. But for me, I think that's going to do it. And just to keep this kind of at a beginner level tutorial, I'm just going to leave it at that. So if you're going to do a bear or a mouse or some other creature with rounded ears, that's how you're going to do that. The next ears we're going to do are going to be pointed, so more like a cat or a fox, for example, maybe a bat. So same process, we're going to go and create a new freehand group. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my materials, so I'm working with something fresh. And I'm just going to make this a little darker just to kind of separate it for now. And pointed ears on my character are a little weird because my hair is kind of floofy. And if you're going to be adding ears to your character and your hair is also floofy, you may want to take the time to adjust it either before to prepare where your ears are going to go, or after once the ears are in place, and then just kind of go around it. Same thing with the mesh as we did for the rounded ears a second ago. We're going to make it pretty wide around the head, but we're going to pull it in really close front to back. And so you've kind of got this thin bubble around the whole head. Well, once you've got that in, I'm going to go ahead and rename this because I'm going to be manipulating this a little bit more than the rounded ears, so I want to make sure I'm working on the right thing. And I'm going to go down here, and I'm actually going to change this cross section to a bottomless triangle, and I'm going to change the curve to top left corner down to the bottom right corner. So that's going to give us a wide flat base and a pointed end. And I'm just going to draw that up, and feel free to draw this more vertical or outward more from the head or closer to the center, however you want. I do have the mirror tool on. That's going to be helpful. Generally, ears are going to be symmetrical on the head, so mirror tool helps with that. So I've got my ears, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that you can make them thinner, make them thicker, and you can also do this at the end once everything's all done if you'd like. But if you are trying to get it sized up from the start before you get too far into it, just grab those and crank up the width. But the thickness, we're going to want to make a negative number. So I'm doing negative 0.300. And as you can kind of see, it makes it a triangle that's pointing toward the back of the head. I'm going to do the same thing for this one. And there you go. And so you can kind of see the ears are coming together here. I've seen other tutorials where people try to draw a whole bunch of triangular hairs and kind of bring the tips all together. And I feel like that's kind of unnecessary when you can just do this quick little trick here. Our ears are going to be 3 hairs each, so not too complicated. So I'm drawing the interior now of the ears. It's the same thing. I'm going to have a slightly lower negative thickness, so negative 0.110, and that just kind of fills in the empty space. I'm going to make it slightly smaller, and I'm going to try to line it up fairly well with the bigger one. It doesn't have to be perfect though, because no one's going to really be able to see that little seam. If you're a perfectionist, feel free to try and match it up perfectly if you'd like, but generally, unless you're going to get really zoomed in on your ears, no one's really going to see this tiny little gap in the seam. And we're also going to add the lighter color in the front as well, so that's going to hide some of this as we're going in. So if you need to, you can also adjust the twist slightly, or you could adjust that thickness, that negative thickness, a little bit if you need to. I do want to note that I had to type in that thickness. Obviously the sliders don't go into negative numbers by default, so just wanted to make a note of that if you missed that piece. But I think that ear looks pretty good. And we're just going to kind of mess with this other one to match it up. And again, I'm going to get the seams pretty close, but they don't have to be perfect. So now that those are looking pretty good, we're going to go ahead and draw our lighter color on the inside to fill in those gaps. I'm going to crank the width down a little bit smaller. I'm going to follow the same general path from the inside of the head up kind of toward the point of the ear. And as I mentioned before, if you want to get this looking better, don't use the default hair textures. I'm just doing it for the purpose of this tutorial. Again, to keep it kind of at a beginner level so you can get this done. As you can see, my ears aren't quite matching up correctly. They're not quite symmetrical or as symmetrical as I would like them to be. And there's a quick fix for this if you're having the same kind of issue that I'm having right here. And the fix for that is to just delete the ones that are not working for you. You would then find the one that looks good, duplicate that hair, and then flip that new one. So that's what I've done here. I've taken that one that I like, it's on the right side of the screen, I've duplicated it, and I've flipped it. And now we've got 2 pretty symmetrical looking ears. The inside fluff on this left one is just a little off, so again I'm going to kind of just tweak these in to match them up a little bit better. And I'm just going to crank the width up slightly. So we're looking pretty good for our little ears here. It's not too complicated, it's not too fancy, it definitely gets the job done. And I try to keep things as true to the real world as I can, and keeping in theme with foxes or cats, their ears don't really bobble around very much. So I don't recommend putting bones in your ears, but I am going to go over that just because some people like to have that little bobble. My personal recommendation is to keep the ears pretty stiff. And again, that's just because I like to keep things true to the real world. If you want to go crazy with it, feel free to go crazy with it. But for my character here, I'm just going to go ahead and put in 1 bone for each ear. So I'm going to have all 3 of those hairs into 1 bone group. I'm going to crank the bone count down to 1. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other ear. I'm going to take those 3 different hairs. I'm going to crank the bone count down to 1 for that group. And I move the fixed point up just a little bit so it's a little more toward the top of the head, not so much in the center of the head. And there you go. So we've got a little bit of motion in those ears. Not too much, but you do want to keep them together in the same group on each side. If you'd like, you could probably keep them all as a single bone group, but I think they look a little better being individual. a little more unique. So that's just my recommendation for bones. If you're going to do it, keep it pretty stiff. One bone should do the job for you. The last thing I want to mention is that if you are one of those people who are into anatomy, and if cat boys and cat girls were real, you probably wouldn't have your human ears. You'd probably use your cat ears. So we're going to go to ear size small, and we're going to crank that up to about 5. 5 or 6 is probably going to be good for you to hide your actual human ears. Again, you have to type that in to go beyond the slider. If you go too high, you're going to have some clipping issues. So 5 or 6, I think, is where you want to be, and that's going to make your ears flat against the head. And then to get rid of that little crimply looking mess, you can just go ahead and draw some new hair to cover that up. So I'm going to go onto one of my under layers here, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw in just a couple new hairs and cover that up, and I think that looks good. So there you go, you got your crossbite cat boy ready to go. And I did mention a little bit earlier in the video that once your ears are complete, you can also manipulate them and make them a little more different. So let me go ahead and jump into that real quick before we finish it up. I'm going to go ahead and go back to our hair layer and grab our ears and just grab the whole group and then adjust the sliders here. So width ratio. So if you want to have some bigger ears, smaller ears, maybe you want to have like these really big bat ears, that's going to be a quick way to do it once you're already done with everything. And that kind of saves you some extra work when you're drawing it all up. You can just make them kind of average sized and then manipulate them bigger or smaller once you're done. So that wraps it up for this video. If this was helpful for you, please give me a thumbs up. If it was not helpful, please give me a thumbs down. If you want to see more of this, please subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next video. See ya!